To kind of touch on the agenda that you outlined earlier today here at the meeting.
Well, in my opening remarks to kick off media days, I talked about some areas of concern that I thought would be appropriate to be discussed as a national agenda for change. And there were four general areas. One was obviously the student-athlete well-being. Another was academics in terms of initial eligibility. Talked about enforcement, and we talked about the need to modernize some of the recruiting rules. And all of this comes out of some of the issues that we've seen arise over the last several months particularly, and also the stimulus of the upcoming presidential retreat that President Mark Emmert of the NCAA has called. And we thought, given the opportunity to discuss these matters, that we could help create some ideas for a national agenda for change. And so, notwithstanding the fact that the SEC's brag bag, so to speak, is full with championships and a lot of other extraordinary achievements by our student athletes, I thought that today was an appropriate place to at least initiate what I hope will be a significant dialogue about some areas that I think are important. And at the same time, it was important to me to say that we need to keep perspective here. These are issues and these are problems, but the perspective is that what our student athletes achieve, men and women with higher graduation rates than ever, with more participation than ever, and some of the wonderful things that I outlined that our kids do and our people do, we need to all keep it in perspective. So while we talk about issues and problems, let's keep in mind just how fantastic the concept that we have uniquely here in America, where we take athletic competition as an educational tool and make it part of higher education. And so part of what we do is to make sure that we keep everything in balance.
Commissioner, if the SEC adopts some of these policies but other conferences don't, do you fear that the SEC might be put at some degree of competitive disadvantage?
Well, we adopted several matters, as you may remember, in our meetings in Destin. For example, the so-called 7-on-7 rule I talked about today. We adopted some roster management matters, and we're going to bring them nationally. And I anticipate some pretty significant dialogue. Our people have always felt that we're going to do the right thing for what we believe is appropriate in the SEC, and we hope that, that as they have in the past. For example, we passed the 28 rule on signing, and then the NCAA passed that rule, and we have every reason to believe we'll be somewhat successful in dealing with that. But the dialogue today really wasn't about the SEC, and it wasn't about SEC rules vis-a-vis the national legislation. It was about a national agenda of issues whose time has come, given the backdrop that I outlined to everybody earlier on before I went into the area.
You talk about streamlining recruiting rules and the so-called equalization. A lot of those rules really involve equalizing recruiting, and you refer to the fact that you can never do that. That doesn't sound like to me it'd be very popular with a lot of mid-major schools.
Yeah. Well, I think what I was just trying to say that the foundation for rules can't be to try to make every single institution or conference the same as every other one, because we aren't the same. Each and every one of us has advantages that others don't have. Each one of us may have disadvantages that others don't have. What I was saying is, for example, young people communicate by text. I think you'd all agree that that's the form of communication. Well, why would we have a rule that says we can't communicate by text with young people who communicate by text? That makes no sense. You know, why should we have a rule that says you can't make telephone calls except once a week or once every? I mean, why would we have such a rule? When a coach goes on recruiting and he goes into a campus, on a high school, if he goes in a certain time, he can talk to the student athlete. If he goes another time, he can only evaluate and he can't talk. When you think about those things, part of what I was saying was, let's be sure we understand what we don't want and what we do want, and make the distinction.
Could you expand about the part where you want to emphasize recruiting in an academic setting that the athlete exists in? Because it appeared to be, you didn't say it, but you almost appeared to be talking about AAU basketball, things like that, where you don't have a high school coach at your off campus.
I wasn't talking about basketball today, but your inference is absolutely correct. And the legislation we passed, and we're bringing it nationally, has to do with the so-called 7-on-7. We believe that the best place for recruiting and in the best interest of young people is to be in the scholastic setting, to be in the educational setting in high school, which is the same setting they're going to be in when they come to our colleges and universities. And so we've passed a rule, and we'll see whether or not the rest of the country is going to follow suit. Be an interesting debate.
Do you have any response to LSU's probation?
You know, I've seen a lot of these opinions over a long period of time, and I don't know if I've ever seen the committee praise an institution the way they praised the work that was done by LSU. And, you know, we're going to have issues on occasion, and the real issue is how you handle them. You could tell by the fact that it was just a one-year probation, that the penalties were all self-imposed penalties. I think it was interesting because this case came down very shortly after another case from another conference, and the contrast was stark. I'm never happy about a problem. I'm not happy that we have it, but I am very pleased about how LSU handled the problem. And I think that's a distinction that has evolved in our league over the last 9 years, is that it's not only a question of we don't want problems, we're trying to prevent them, but when they do occur, the committee has finally said, if you handle it properly, with integrity, we'll understand.
Commissioner, a few years ago you mentioned that we would look back on this as the golden age of the Southeastern Conference. Do you still feel like that age is ongoing?
Well, I do. This year our kids contributed to that concept. You know, we won football 5 in a row, baseball 3 in a row, and so for 3 consecutive years we've bookended our championships with football and baseball. And this year we won as many as 7 national championships in total. And one of the things that I really appreciate about our league, and one that doesn't get a great deal of publicity, is the fact that we're very, very good in a lot of sports for men and women. We won a championship in gymnastics, in indoor track, in tennis, in equestrian, in rifle, and I think in swimming. And so when we are dealing with 4,800 or so student athletes, and when we can win that many championships, and when we can have 4 or 5 national runners-up, we sponsor 20 sports. So this year we had over half of our sports were either the national champion or the national champion runner-up. So, you know, I'm a history buff, and I try to think, looking back, and I do believe that in years to come, we'll look back and say this is certainly one of the golden ages, and 2010 and 11 contributed to that.
This media day gets bigger every year. More and more people cover it. I was asking the coaches, is it hard to be yourself with the texting, Facebook, and Twitter? Can you sympathize some of the coaches what they have to deal with from a media standpoint, or do you have any advice for them on how to handle all this?
I think by just looking at these microphones, I can certainly sympathize with them. You know, but I think that's all part of what we do. You know, we all who you know, have a responsibility in intercollegiate athletics know that people care. The reason there are so many of you here is because you represent thousands and thousands of people who care about what's going on in the SEC.